Trump's tariff on Brics will protect the U.S. dollar. China and its closest economic partners, who call themselves the Brics nations, want to displace the U.S. dollar as the world's most powerful reserve currency. They would like to accomplish this by establishing a new Brics currency. The dollar is currently the standard currency for international trade, for example, in oil and gas markets. A Brics currency, especially if it were under the control of Beijing and in wide use, could be used to sanction the United States and make the Brics countries more dominant in international trade. President-elect Donald Trump opposes a Brics currency and said on the campaign trail that it would cost countries that tried to move away from the U.S. dollar. On November 30, he made that cost explicit. He would impose 100% tariffs on any country that attempts to create a Brics currency or otherwise replace the U.S. dollar with some other currency as the international reserve currency. Trump said he would require commitments from Brics countries against the displacement of the U.S. dollar. Otherwise, they should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful U.S. economy, he wrote on social media platform X. Trump is imposing an immediate cost on Brics countries by only threatening them with 100% tariffs. And he is, in effect, imposing what is called a separating equilibrium in game theory. He is separating the good from the bad from a U.S. perspective. Those who are implacably opposed to the status quo of U.S. dollar leadership in the global economy, for example, Russia, China, and Brazil, will refuse to commit, reveal their anti-U.S. intentions, and receive 100% tariffs in response. Those not so tough on the dollar, for example, India and South Africa, may decide to commit against a Brics currency. This will create distance between these countries and the rest of Brics. Trump's goal of maintaining the U.S. dollar as the medium of international trade is good for America and good for democracy. It will maintain the U.S. ability to sanction countries that violate human rights and the borders of U.S. partners. That is good for democracy because the dollar trade and the necessity for international transfers through U.S. banks make dictators, many of whom belong to Brics, vulnerable to sanctions if they commit egregious human rights abuses. Brics is a term invented by the former chief economist of Goldman Sachs to refer to Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, once thought to be part of the most important emerging markets, and therefore, good bets for growth investors. Brics countries were lauded at academic conferences around the world, perhaps with donations linked to the Brics countries. Those days are gone, but the Brics is still with us, getting stronger with more members, and mostly led by their bankroller in Beijing. In 2023, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia joined Brics. Saudi Arabia was invited to join, but has not yet done so. Some experts argue that there is no need for Trump's Brics tariffs, as the Brics countries have not made much progress on their proposed currency. But their illiberal intention is apparent. Most are dictatorships or autocracies. They are apparently trying to sanction-proof their economies by exploring a Brics currency. They are openly planning misdeeds, such as the invasion of Taiwan, and how to protect themselves from sanctions afterward. If they do not see pushback from the United States and our allies, they are likely to continue to persist, find more effective strategies, and one day be successful in their goals: invading neighboring countries, weakening the United States, and degrading our ability to promote democratic values globally. Another argument against the Brics tariff will be that it is a tax on the consumer. It is actually more complicated. Sometimes the consumer does not pay at all. In these cases, importers, manufacturers, or targeted countries take steps to decrease consumer prices to their pre-tariff level to protect their market share or total exports. In the case of countries, this can mean increased subsidies for exporters or depreciation of their own currencies. According to J.P. Morgan Chase & Co., Beijing may depreciate its currency by 10 to 15% to counteract Trump's tariffs, for example. If Trump increased tariffs on China by 15% and the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, depreciated the yuan by 15% relative to the U.S. dollar, The blow to the consumer would soften, though U.S. exports to China would likely decrease. J.P. Morgan predicts a 5% average depreciation among emerging market countries in the first 2 quarters of 2025. What many economists would have a hard time admitting is that former President Barack Obama also levied what amounts to tariffs on foreign countries, but in a different form. For example, his support of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, free trade agreement with many Asian countries had environmental and labor requirements. These were new costs for supplying consumers, just as tariffs are a cost. Both are a cost levied on foreign producers in exchange for access to U.S. markets. Some of the TPP costs would have been passed on to U.S. consumers in the form of higher prices due to the higher cost of production. Some would not. Many economists celebrated Obama's tariffs, which were giveaways from a U.S. perspective, but denounced Trump's tariffs that went straight to the U.S. Treasury. Tariffs on Brics countries, especially those that pursue a Brics currency to supplant the U.S. dollar, will help decrease the chance that this authoritarian bloc will become dominant in the future. Such dominance would be bad for America and bad for the world. China's ongoing interference. A significant threat to Canada. It certainly seems like a never-ending saga. But Canadians have been inundated with stories in the media for a year and a half now on the extent to which the People's Republic of China, PRC, has been sticking its fingers into Canadian affairs. Whether it is directly trying to get pro-China MPs elected to Parliament, stealing sensitive biotechnology from Canada's highest-level lab in Winnipeg, or setting up police stations in several cities to provide services to Canadians of Chinese heritage, this is the first time I've heard of spying and intimidation as a service. There doesn't seem to be an end in sight, nor will there be. Whatever the outcome of the public inquiry into foreign interference, it seems clear that a few things will move forward. While the following list is assuredly not exhaustive, it should nevertheless serve as ample warning of how significant a threat China poses to Canada on multiple levels. First and foremost, and most dangerously, the federal government is showing little sign it's taking the threats seriously. It continues to evade requests for documentation and obfuscates the extent to which some MPs are in the PRC's grasp. Chinese influence will continue to grow as the PRC assuredly believes that it has gotten away with its actions thus far and has no reason to think it will be blocked anytime soon. In other words, the CCP will keep harassing Canadians who oppose the current regime, especially those in the Uyghur, Tibetan, Hong Kong, and Falun Gong diasporas, as this is what all autocratic nations do, and seek to ensure its lackeys are in positions of power. Laws are merely an inconvenience to officials in China, and that regime has shown no signs of respecting the law of the land here in Canada. With respect to technology, the PRC will most definitely seek to use its hardware and platforms to monitor individuals and gather reams of information on them. In this we are not alone, but Canada and Canadians seem too beholden to Chinese technology, e.g. TikTok, without considering the security and privacy implications. Another front has opened of late that is much more worrisome. According to a source who contacted me, the PRC has been approaching First Nations and asking them to allow it to establish a variety of partnerships on Canadian soil, drone manufacturing, tobacco farms, etc. Whether or not the federal government is aware of these efforts is unknown, nor is its reaction to such moves. If it is anything like their disavowal of CSIS intelligence on Chinese electoral interference, no one should be satisfied. China is undoubtedly telling First Nations that it is not like other partners, accusing Canadian Western companies of a history of abusing our original inhabitants, the whole settler-colonizer argument, and hence is better placed as a reliable partner. This, of course, ignores two critical areas that undermine this claim. Looking at Beijing's treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, as well as Tibetans, that regime executes the exact same types of actions it sanctimoniously accuses the West of perpetrating. It is acting similarly in Africa. Why some would fall for this revisionist history is anyone's guess. History shows that China has always been, and will continue to be, a colonial power. Secondly, the PRC has a history of helping nations with infrastructure projects, ports, factories, airports, etc., only to take possession of these facilities when the country cannot come up with the funds to pay for them. To expect the PRC to act any differently here is a fantasy. First nations may think they are in a win-win situation with their PRC sugar daddies, but they would be well advised to see the experiences of others. The other aspect of concern is China's claim to be a near-Arctic nation, not by any map I've ever seen. If it were to engage our Inuit communities, that would garner it access to Canada's north, a presence not in our interest. The bottom line is that China wants to be the world's dominant power by 2049, the centenary of its founding as a modern autocracy. Anyone who thinks this is a good idea for everyone else is delusional. As for the Canadian governments, federal, provincial, territorial, municipal, and First Nations, it is well past time that they take China's threats to us seriously. Alas, on that front, there is little room for optimism. China's high-speed rail system. Exciting, headline-grabbing, and a mistake. Beijing remains committed to developing the nation's extensive high-speed rail system, though there may be more effective uses for this funding and urgent economic priorities to consider. China's much vaunted ambition to extend high-speed rail links to all regions of the country announces three important things. First, the extent of the system and the sleekness of the trains will continue to offer bragging rights to China's leadership and elicit superlatives from media outlets both in China and overseas. Second, most of the proposed system is or will be a waste, especially burdensome in China's struggling economy. There are better ways to direct the nation's labor, capital, and natural resources. Third, the decision to build the system highlights the weakness of the nation's top-down, centrally planned way of making economic decisions. China's high-speed rail project is, without a doubt, the biggest infrastructure project in the world today, perhaps ever in history. Existing and planned lines will link China's populous east from Haikou in the south to Manchuria in the north, and extend to the far northwest and to Tibet and the Himalayas. The plans call for more than 30,000 miles of special track in a special roadbed. The project is expensive. In just the last 5 years, it has cost the state-owned State Railway Group the equivalent of some $500 billion in construction, supply, new trains, and stations. The group already carries a debt burden approaching the equivalent of $1 trillion, the servicing of which costs the equivalent of more than $25 billion a year. Despite the huge cost, the project is a favorite of Chinese Communist Party, CCP leader Xi Jinping, who has enlarged the already ambitious plans he inherited from his predecessor, Hu Jintao. Those who favor the project praise the convenience it will bring and how it will reduce pollution and carbon emissions by substituting for the use of gas-powered cars. These enthusiasts note how shortened travel times will improve economic efficiencies and better integrate otherwise disparate populations. The links, the plan proponents say, will also encourage urbanization, which, they argue, will help cure the backwardness of the nation's rural areas and give China a more sophisticated and better educated population. Without refuting any of these claims, others question the wisdom of going ahead with these plans. With Chinese finance and economics in precarious states, the question is whether more high-speed rail is the best use of the nation's financial, labor, and natural resources. There is no getting away from the fact that China's slowed economy needs a boost that only Beijing can provide. And though it is true that spending on rail infrastructure provides an economic lift of sorts, many still wonder if high speed is the best way to proceed. Some have argued that the nation needs a better social safety net, not more luxury trains, especially now, with the economy faltering. The project also increases national debt at a time when local governments are heavily burdened with outsized debt and in some cases have needed support from Beijing just to meet the basic obligations they owe their populations. There is a more urgent need to concentrate on ways to address the festering property crisis, rejuvenate the Chinese consumer, and induce private businesses to hire and otherwise invest in new and improved facilities. Spending on high-speed rail competes with these needs. Even if Beijing wants to spend on rail, critics point out that it would be better to invest in conventional construction, as it can also move freight. Even the system's harshest critics do not dispute the efficacy of high-speed rail in the country's densely populated east and southeast. The line connecting Shanghai and the technology hub in Hangzhou, for instance, is fully utilized and has proved to be a profitable success since its opening in 2010. The more far-flung and expensive parts of the system raise questions. Critics note that the line running out to Fushun has reported only 9,000 daily trips on average since its opening in 2021. No doubt that number will rise. The average includes the periods of lockdowns under the CCP's zero-COVID measures, but it would have to increase tremendously to justify the expense of the line, and that is unlikely for some time to come, if ever. The same is true of the line planned for Urumqi. Behind all these particulars and the questions they raise, the nature of the high-speed rail project points to a more fundamental flaw in Chinese economics. China's centrally planned, top-down economic management system takes its cue from politics as much as probably more than economics. Accordingly, the CCP seems to prefer showcase projects, such as high-speed rail, over more prosaic but also more practical and profitable efforts, such as rail lines that do not look as sleek or move as fast, but can also carry essential freight. A less centralized system would be more likely to seize on this point, build high speed where it works, and make other arrangements elsewhere. But China under the CCP, if anything, is becoming more centralized by the day.